In the previous video, I told you that the whole H2O thing was a lie. Today, I'm here to tell you something even more uncomfortable. The problem wasn't the water. The significant problem is that you have lost your essential voltage, and absolutely no one has explained to you what that truly means for your entire body and its functions. If you're tired, if you don't recover, if you feel like something just isn't getting started, it's not a lack of strength or willpower. It's not your age either. And it wasn't the water either. It's simply that your body is probably discharged. And here comes the uncomfortable question. If that liquid can bring life back, why? Why do we keep thinking that hydrating is just about drinking water? The whole H2O thing was just the surface. Today we're going to talk about the real problem. Your body runs on electricity. And as I was saying, it's likely that you're losing it. For decades, we've been taught based on an incomplete premise. We've been consistently told that water is merely a kind of simple solvent, essentially a transport truck for essential nutrients, and today I am truly here to show you that this widely accepted notion is probably the single biggest, most profound lie in all of basic biology, because water doesn't just transport life. Water is, in fact, life itself. It is the very essence of existence, the electrical support of life. If you consistently feel utterly exhausted, if the persistent inflammation simply won't go away, if your cognitive mind seems to be operating at only half its usual power, then please do not look for a simple pill deficiency. Instead, you should definitely look for a fundamental voltage deficiency. The cathedral, which is your body, isn't broken, it's simply run out of light. And keep this idea in mind because it's going to stay with us throughout the whole video. Life doesn't work because of the amount of water, it works because of electricity. And to understand why we are so sick today, let's take a trip back to the end of the 19th century. At that time, a schism occurred that determined the fate of millions of lives. On one side was the famous scientist Louis Pasteur and his germ theory. His message was simple and easy to sell. Is the enemy external? It's a microbe, and it must be killed. And on the other side were giants like Claude Bernard, Antoine Béchamp, and above all, René Quinton, whom I mentioned in the previous video. They staunchly defended the profound terrain theory and emphatically stated the mere microbe is truly nothing. What profoundly matters is the intricate and complex environment in which the microbe genuinely lives and thrives. And here, allow me to give you a little preview, just a small hint. When we talk about the environment, I'm not just referring to cleanliness or nutrients. I'm talking about charge, about order, and yes, also about electricity. Well then, now let me use again the aquarium example that I already used in the previous video about H3O2. Imagine an aquarium with dirty water and stagnant water. Clearly, the fish are starting to get sick. Pasteur. What he taught was that you had to inject medicine into the fish or try to kill the bacteria in the water. Quinton, however, no. What he did was teach us that the solution was simply to clean the aquarium. If you change the water, if you restore its salinity and its electrical charge, the fish heals on its own and the microbe no longer finds anywhere to feed. Unfortunately, Pasteur's model was more profitable. And no, what I'm telling you does not invalidate the germ theory. The point is that things like antibiotics or vaccines could be patented, but you couldn't patent the terrain that is the water. The history of medicine took the path that was faster and also the most profitable. Quinton demonstrated in his famous marine dispensaries in Paris that by injecting isotonic marine plasma, he could save dying babies from cholera and typhus. He didn't kill the germ, he strengthened the aquarium. It is said that Pasteur himself, on his deathbed, acknowledged Bernard, referring to another of the researchers I mentioned to you, Bernard. He was right. The terrain is everything. But the mistake had already taken hold. We have spent 100 years chasing external shadows, while our own internal battery was running down. Well, if you only take away one truly important thing from this particular part of the video, let it be this crucial point. Water is absolutely not a passive liquid. It is, in fact, an active and integral part of the body's intricate electrical system. And when that essential electricity is unfortunately lost, the entire body goes into a critical emergency mode. Now let's get into the technical part, the one that almost no one explains to you, which is cellular voltage. Well, each one of your 37 trillion with a T trillion cells is a miniature battery. They have a positive pole and a negative pole. Just imagine all those trillions of cells. And the voltage is generated thanks to the difference in salt concentration between the inside and the outside of the cell. Alright, at this point there are two important things you need to keep in mind, and I'm going to try to explain them to you as simply as possible. First, the gradient is that sodium is outside and potassium is inside. When we talk about a gradient, we're simply talking about a difference. It's like talking about a slope. If there's a slope, something can move, and if there's no slope, then everything stays still. The cell lives thanks to that electrical gradient. Outside there's more sodium, and inside there's more potassium. That difference between the outside and the inside creates tension, and that tension is what generates energy. When the gradient disappears, the body becomes like a dead battery. And it doesn't matter how much food comes in because there's no spark. It's one thing to have fuel and quite another to have electricity to use it. And then the second thing you need to understand is what they call the pump. Your body spends almost 30% of all its energy, the famous ATP I've already told you about, just to maintain this difference. That is, by moving these ions across the membrane. And this is what we call the pump, the Sodium-Potassium Pump. And here comes a word that is almost never explained well. Electrolytes. Remember that word. These electrolytes are not supplements, nor are they powders for the gym. They are the mineral salts, sodium, potassium, and magnesium that make this gradient I was telling you about possible. Without electrolytes, there is no gradient, and without a gradient, there is no voltage. And electrolytes are not just a detail, they are the system itself. That's why when electrolytes are lost or diluted, the cell shuts down, even if you have plenty of food. But you don't need to memorize all these numbers or facts, you just need to understand the logic. The more charge a cell has, the more alive it is. And why, you might ask? Why is this so vital? Well, it's very simple. Because a healthy cell vibrates at a membrane potential of -70 to -90 millivolts. So at -50 millivolts, we start to feel chronic fatigue, and at -20 millivolts, from certain voltage levels onward, the cell even loses its ability to repair itself and to communicate, and in that context, that's when chaotic cellular behaviors can appear. And one of the most extreme examples of this is cancer. This is something that is observed when a cell loses energy and stops obeying the whole. In the end, this is not the sole cause of cancer, but it is a common condition. A cell without energy simply stops obeying the system. Put simply, without voltage there is no order, and without order the body goes into emergency mode. Up to this point, it's all been pure biology. And now that I think you understand why all of this isn't just a technical detail, from here I can make a simple comparison with technology so you can understand it a bit better. An iPhone with 1% battery. What it does is dim the screen and also close apps to survive. Well, your body does exactly the same thing. Chronic inflammation is the power-saving mode of a body without voltage, and it's not a malfunction. It's a survival strategy in response to a shortage of electrical charge. Just notice how important this is. Dr. Gerald Pollack, whom I also mentioned to you with his cutting-edge science, gave us the key to reconstruction. But before talking about solutions, I need you to understand something fundamental, and that is what the water inside the body really is. The water in your body is not H2O, regular liquid water. It's the special water I told you about, the exclusion zone, or H3O2. Is not a magical molecule. It's simply the same water, but organized in a different way. It's more or less like the difference between a pile of bricks and a magnificent cathedral standing tall. It's a type of water with a gel-like consistency that is arranged hexagonally, and it forms right next to your cell membranes. This water expels protons, that is, the positive charge, and retains an excess of electrons, the negative charge. Well, that's it for now. Once again, I've talked to you about structure and energy. Now I'm going to take it a step further and talk to you about communication. And this is where the revelation from the Russian school comes into play. Pay close attention, because a cell not only requires crucial energy to survive and thrive, it also needs vital information in order to know precisely what to do. Esteemed researchers like Alexander Gerwich and later Fritz Albert Popp found that living cells inherently emit a subtle form of light, which they termed the so-called biophotons. Your cells not only communicate chemically, they also talk to each other through pulses of coherent light. The structured water in your body acts as the fiber optic network for all of this communication. And if the water is dead, meaning it has no minerals and no structure, it's very simple. The light can't travel. Communication is cut off, and the cathedral is left in darkness. And you, the inner architect, no longer know what to repair. This concept, deeply developed at the universities of Leningrad and Moscow, tells us that we are beings of liquid light. And they don't mean it in a mystical sense, they mean it in a biological sense. Easy water absorbs energy from the environment, especially infrared, and converts it into voltage. You recharge yourself with sunlight, just like a photovoltaic panel. But don't get me wrong, this doesn't mean you have to stare at the sun or do anything crazy. It simply means you need to understand how your body converts environmental energy into internal order. And you also need to understand why, when that process fails, everything simply starts to fall apart. Well then, if we've understood that we are a battery, this is not a list of medical recipes. It's basically a way to understand what a body needs in order not to collapse. And the question isn't which pill should I take, but rather how to prevent the battery from draining. And to achieve that, we have several paths. First, restore the terrain, the Quinton plasma. Don't drink, let's be specific, don't drink distilled or chlorinated water because you need conductivity. As I was saying, for years we've been losing electrolytes without realizing it through stress, sweating, chronic inflammation, extreme diets, or water that's low in minerals. And we've tried to compensate by drinking even more water, which has actually made things worse. The problem is that water without minerals doesn't recharge a battery, it dilutes it. And a body needs conductivity. This explains why, historically, complete mineral solutions like isotonic marine plasma have been used to restore the terrain meaning the human body. The use of isotonic seawater, just so you're aware, specifically, it's 1 part pure seawater to 3 parts mineral water, which restores the 78 minerals from the periodic table in the exact proportion your cells need to maintain the sodium-potassium gradient. But don't just focus on the ratio is interesting, sure, but what's really important is the idea that without complete minerals, there is no conductivity. Second, infrared charge. 50% of solar energy is infrared, but this isn't for tanning. It's to charge your water, among other things. Red light stimulates cytochrome C oxidase in your mitochondria. And the mitochondria, as we've already discussed in previous videos, are your power plants. And like any power plant, they have a key component that allows energy to flow. That component is called cytochrome C oxidase, just so you understand. Well, when that enzyme works properly, oxygen is used efficiently and energy is produced in an orderly way. However, when it doesn't work properly, the chain gets stuck and energy drops. Red light and near-infrared light possess a very distinct and specific property. They help that enzyme get back to doing its job. It's kind of like your wall charger for your system. And what I'm telling you isn't some miracle therapy, it's not magic. I'm explaining something like how to oil a rusty gear, how to put oil on it. Light doesn't create energy out of nothing, but it allows the mitochondria to start producing it again. In other words, it's a support that's consistent with how biology works. And then finally there's the third path, which is earthing or grounding. The Earth, as I'm sure you know, is an infinite reservoir of negative electrons. And when you walk barefoot, you absorb those electrons, which neutralize free radicals. These are positive charges that oxidize you. And this isn't magic either, it's simply basic electrical exchange. It's exactly the same physics we use to protect buildings and machinery when we ground them. It's the grounding wire that stabilizes your cathedral or your body. Health is not the absence of disease. Health is the abundance of voltage. Regaining your energy isn't about producing more. It's about reclaiming your sovereignty. A tired man is an easy man to manipulate. An exhausted body is a vulnerable body. However, a man or a woman with energy can choose. To have your cathedral illuminated makes you a free man or woman, and above all, restores your dignity. And dignity in this sense is having the light on. It's regaining the voltage you had when you were 30 years old. In this video, we've brought the light back to the cathedral. We've understood what voltage is, why it's lost, and what the body needs to light up again. But now an uncomfortable question arises, because it turns out that having light is important, but it's not enough. Something more is needed because even with energy, a system without control can self-destruct. Someone needs to decide what will be repaired and what won't, because when the body is damaged, not everything should be rebuilt at the same time. And if no one brings order, even with energy, chaos will continue. In the next video, we're going to talk about all of that. About the system that puts on the brakes, about something like the internal sheriff that prevents the body from attacking itself. Because true longevity doesn't depend only on having energy. It also depends on knowing how to use it. I'll see you in the next video, and as I always say, keep moving forward, always forward, and I'll read your comments.